Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Meeting House for this half hour of life, politics, and Jesus. I'm Dr. Dwight A. Moody. I'm the host. I'm your friend as well. I use my middle initial, A, because of the famous Dwight Moody, D.L. Moody. Most people have heard of him, and everybody asked me about him. He was an evangelist and an organizer back in the 19th century, born in 1837, died in 1899, a great influence on what we call the evangelical movement today. And sometimes I say that every technique and practice that Billy Graham perfected, D.L. Moody started. Very influential man, quoted many times. And people ask me about my name all the time, although I was born in 1950 when Dwight David Eisenhower was famous, and that's where I got my name. But I run into people all the time who want to know if I am the famous Dwight Moody, and of course I'm not. And but I was at a conference in Houston, Texas years ago, setting up my. We were having an Academy of Preachers event there, and I had on the table my little book, The 9 Marks of a Good Sermon, Dwight A. Moody. And somebody came by and picked it up and just went bonkers thinking, oh, I thought I would never get to meet you and all this kind of stuff. And of course they misjudged who I was, but I didn't have the energy to correct them on all that. Anyway, Dwight A. Moody today, coming to you from the Meeting House. I want to begin today by giving tribute to two people that I worked with at Georgetown College 20 and 25 years ago. The first one, Governor Martha Lane Collins. After she finished her tour of duty as the first and only female governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, one of the things she did was join the administrative team at the college. I got to know her very well. Her husband was a graduate of Georgetown, and we worked together on a number of projects that were very important. And I want to honor her today as a woman of intelligence, of competence, and kindness. And so I say, with everybody else in the Commonwealth, rest in peace, dear Governor. And then another person that came into my life about that same time, here we are, it's All Saints weekend, so maybe I'm mentioning two of people who have been saints to me. The Reverend Jack Willett, he is a 1958 graduate of the college. He retired, returned to Georgetown, where we became friends and colleagues. And he became a helper to me in my role as dean of the chapel. He did so much for me. One of the things he did, he was a vendor for very fine Persian carpets. And he helped me secure a Persian carpet, not for the chapel, which they still use today anytime there's a speaker. But also he secured one for me personally, and it has been in my study all these years, 25 years, except right now, it's in my garage studio. As a matter of fact, I'm sitting on it right today, as you can see. And I want to thank him again. Thank you, dear Jack. I'm hoping to get to your funeral service, your memorial service, as soon as I know when it is. So God bless both of you on this All Saints weekend. I want to begin today talking just a little bit about 60 years ago, 1965. I was a teenager, but things were shaking and moving in America. It was a time of turbulence. It was a time of change. You remember the great song, Bob Dylan song, The Times They Are A-Changing, had just come out a few years earlier. Everything that's happening today in our country, or most things, are a reaction to the things that were happening, beginning to happen in 1965. That was the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War and opposition to it, the revival of folk music and the emergence of rock and roll, Woodstock in 1969. And then, of course, a few years later, Watergate and the resignation of Richard Nixon. And in the middle of all this, the Jesus movement out on the West Coast, where young people were playing guitars and developing contemporary Christianity, non-denominational Christianity, contemporary Christian music. They were baptizing out in the Pacific Ocean. It was a time of immense social and cultural turbulence. And in the middle of all this, the pill and the sexual revolution. 1965, that was the year, right in the middle of that year, that I walked down an aisle and announced that God was calling me to be a gospel preacher. It's a decision I've never regretted. It's a calling I have embraced and loved and enjoyed all of my years. I was a 15-year-old boy. What were you doing in 1965? Those of you who were alive. Those were traumatic times. The times they are a-changing, Bob Dylan sang. And now, 60 years later, we have the conservative reaction to all of those liberalizing trends and events in American culture. We have a great pushback against civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, and the rights of accused and the incarcerated. This pushback takes the form of being anti-everything, anti-DEI, anti-immigrants, and the emergence of what we now call white Christian nationalism. But beyond that, we're dealing with the presence and power of the internet, social media, platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and our own YouTube. And now we're getting ready for artificial intelligence. We look around at the influence of sports and music. Last night, one of the great World Series games of all times. The slow decline of organized religion and the divisions within religion in the United States. The times are still changing. It's like, do you feel the earth moving under your feet? That's another song from those times. Who knows what is going to happen? Who knows where all of this is going to lead our communities, our churches, our entire country, our religion? And today, you and I and millions of people, we're looking for insight, for strength. We're looking for stability and social connections, for personal success, for survival, for a spiritual path forward. We're looking for a way to walk, a way to live, a way to love. I know many of us are disappointed in three of the great centers of cultural power: politics, religion, and money. In politics, we have what I think is an out-of-control White House and a castrated Congress. We have a religious world that's deeply divided. Some love what's happening, others are horrified. And much of the religious world, I think, is too drunk on power and too indifferent to the sufferings and searchings of people. Here we are. The government is shut down. People are losing their salaries, their income, their food. And then the billionaire class. In 1965, there were no billionaires. There were a lot of millionaires, but no billionaires. The wealth has moved to the upper 1%. Some of them are giving things away. giving lots, hundreds of millions of dollars, but others of them are just taking things from us. It's not a good testimony. And often we are disgusted, we're disappointed, we're ready to dump all of it. Hardly a week goes by that I don't read about somebody who's trying to escape all of it. They're moving to the hills off the grid, away from confusion and conflicts. And some of them are even moving out of the country to Canada, to France, to Europe, to Central America, to the Caribbean. You ever feel like leaving? You ever think about packing up your stuff and moving to a more stable place? Well, I'm here in the meeting house, have been since 1998, leading a search for answers, for encouragement, for inspiration. And I hope you find some of that today, something good for your life, something good for your week, something that will make you stronger, more certain, more hopeful, make you a saint to somebody around you. Now, I want to say in times like this, we often turn to religion for answers, and that's a wonderful consolation. Sometimes it's a great temptation. Yes, religion does assert that it has a lot of answers. There are a lot of books, religious books, written with the word answer in the title. A lot of sermons preached. Answers in Genesis, or things like that. But I want to tell you that religion, spirituality, is also the deep, abiding place of the great questions of the human soul. You may get some answers from religion, but it will also help you formulate the great questions of life. And I have been drawn to this side of the equation. Philosophy and religion both are built on great questions like, who are we and what is our purpose? What is our future? How did we get here? Is there a higher power? And what happens after we die? And why do things happen the way they do? Why am I the way I am? There are a lot of questions in the Bible. A number of years ago, I read the Bible from cover to cover to count the questions. Now, I know that may be a suspect motivation for reading the Bible, and maybe something good will come out of that if that's true. I've carried that Bible, I call it my question Bible, around for years, but I cannot find it this week. I went looking for it. It's all boxed up somewhere here in my garage. Now, I hope soon to be able to move out of this garage into a home. But I looked for that Bible this week and could not find it. But in that Bible, I marked every question. Actually, I marked what I did. I read through it and made a mark at every question mark in that Bible. Now, you know that in the original, both Hebrew and Greek, there was no punctuation of any kind. Certainly no question marks, no capital letters. In fact, is in the Hebrew, not even any vowels, just consonants. Try reading that. So when you open up your Bible and read it, the question mark is an editorial decision. It's a translator's judgment. It's a modern effort to try to understand the text and make it readable to modern people. Nevertheless, you want to guess how many questions or question marks I found in my Bible? 66 books of the Bible. Maybe I should have a drawing. Write this down. Here they are, 2,550 questions. let's say, give or take a few. I'm certain I didn't catch all of them. That's in my Revised Standard Version of the Bible. You think about that for a minute. Do any of these questions come quickly to your mind? I think about the question in the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament. What do these stones mean? You know, people would pile up stones to signify the place where an important event took place, or in some cases, where the edge of the property was. And this question, many times asked in a worship service as a rhetorical question, what do these stones mean? Is a preface to somebody explaining part of the group's history. Well, let's turn to the Psalms. A lot of questions in the Psalms. One of the most prominent and famous is that great question, how long, O Lord? How long? That is the question of somebody who's in the midst of suffering or danger or loss or something like that. And they pray this prayer, one of the deepest, truest, broadest prayers of the human race. How long, O Lord? How long? Or what about in the prophets? You know, Micah 6:8, which is very popular these days, begins with a question. What does the Lord require of you? Boy, that's a pretty basic question, isn't it? We all ask that question over and over again in specific situations and in life situations. But of course, Micah answers that question with this famous statement, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. What a great text. Turn to the New Testament for a minute. Think about the question that the wise man asked, where is he that is born King of the Jews? Or think about the question that Jesus asked his disciples. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Or a question that we quote a lot. This is Paul in his letter to the Romans. What shall separate us from the love of God? I know some other questions come to your mind this week as I talk about it. You've probably got some of those questions twirling around in your head right now as I speak. So I sat down today and this week and read through the Gospels in my Bible. I underlined all the questions in Matthew 165, in Mark 116, Luke 139, the Gospel of John 162, for a total of 582 questions just in the Gospel. Can you think of any? Remember, Nicodemus came to Jesus by night. Jesus told him he needed to be born again. And Nicodemus asked the question, how can a man or woman or a boy or girl be born when he is old? There's the story of the blind man that Jesus healed. According to John's gospel, there are 19 questions in that narrative that begins with the question put to Jesus, okay, Jesus, who was it that sinned, this man or his parents, that caused his blindness? Well, it's a great question. Because we sometimes think that people suffer bad things in life because they're sinners. And the Bible teaches that's not true, but now there's a funny question in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night that Jesus was arrested. Jesus took his disciples. They went to this place of prayer. Jesus told them to stay here and pray, and he went a little further and prayed that famous prayer, Lord, if you're willing, take this cup of suffering from me, but not my will, but yours be done. And then he got up from his prayer, went back to his disciples. They were sleeping, and Jesus asked the question, why are you sleeping? You know, I could stop and talk a long time about that. Why are you sleeping when we should be up and listening and learning and praying? According to John's gospel, the very first question that Jesus asked was the question, What do you want? What do you want? He asked it a number of times during his ministry. I'm going to come back to that, I think, next week. But today I want to tell you a story. For a number of years, about 10 years, I led an organization called the Academy of Preachers. And we had festivals for young people ages 14 to 28 who were discerning a call to preach. We had festivals all over the country, and I attended many of these. National festivals, regional festivals, campus festivals. Every year we had a theme. And our theme in 2014 was the phrase, questions of the soul. Our national festival was in Indianapolis that year, and all the young people who came to that festival preached. We gave them 15 minutes to preach, which is twice as much time as the Catholics needed and only half as much time as the Pentecostals needed. You all understand that. Every year we published a book of these sermons, and those young people who turned in their sermons, we published a book. So the book that year was simply entitled Questions of the Soul. I have it here in my hand. You have a picture of it on your screen. It was edited by a good friend of mine by the name of Thomas Valentine. He was pastor of a church in Danville at the time. He now teaches on the faculty of Campbellsville University. But when I open this up, this book, Questions of the Soul, I look at the index, and there's Aaron Cole Carr, who's now pastor of the First Baptist Church of Moorhead, Kentucky. And he preached on the question of the disciples who put to Jesus, are you the one, or should we look for another? Still a very powerful question today for searching people. And then there's Elijah McDavid, who now is the pastor of the Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he took this statement from 2 Corinthians, quote, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. And he turned that into a question. How do we fix our eyes on the unseen? It's a great sermon. And then Elizabeth Pollard, now pastor of the New Chapel United Methodist Church in Newman, Georgia. She took the question from Isaiah chapter 7, whom shall I send and who will go for us? She was one of the very best young preachers we had in 10 years. But I want to turn your attention to another young preacher at that festival. His sermon is published on page 26 with the title, On the Edge of the Abyss. He takes the famous question of Exodus 3 when Moses asked God. You remember this episode. God said, Moses, I want you to go down to Egypt and tell the people that I've sent you, and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. One of the questions that Moses asked God was this. Okay, God, if my people ask me your name, what do you want me to tell them? Pretty practical, insightful question, don't you think? If they're going to ask me, okay, what's the name of this God who has sent you down here? What do you want me to say? I wish I had time to expound more on that. It's a wonderful sermon. His name is David Black. And I want to remind you who he is, because you've seen him and heard him on the news lately. He's the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Chicago. He was attacked by ICE agents during a protest and a march. He was detained. I think I'm right in saying that he has now filed a $1 million lawsuit against ICE. I have a picture. You've seen this picture. We have a little 14-second video. Let's watch it.
I just want Chicagoans to be thinking about, if this is what they're doing to pastors and to journalists and to teachers and to mothers and to elders who are gathering to sing and to pray outside of this facility, what might they be doing to our neighbors who are behind those walls?
Very interesting. I'm so proud of David. You would never have expected this of him. I want to read you a paragraph from his sermon. In this book, I went to college in one of the most secular schools in the country. I think this is Middleborough College, but it's one of the colleges in New England. I remember reading about my college in a guidebook and seeing that it was ranked first place in the category, quote, students least likely to care about God, end quote. When I got there, I was so excited. I was tired of church. He grew up in a church of God. He was tired of all the rules. Here was a place where hedonism reigned supreme. It was a young man's paradise. I remember going to a room party early in my first semester. I guess word had gotten around that there was this kid who had brought his Bible to college. And some people were pretty curious about it, in the same way you might be curious to see a chimpanzee riding a unicycle. An upperclassman who was there asked me sarcastically, "Do you really believe God exists?" In one of the most unlikely college environments in the United States, this young man whose call to ministry was shaped by his time with the Academy of Preachers, preaching this sermon, Indianapolis, 1914. I honor him. I don't know whether he was formally arrested. He was detained. I got arrested once. I'm going to tell you about it. Tommy Valentine, the man who edited this book, resigned his church in Kentucky. I was on the faculty at Georgetown College. They called me to be the interim pastor. And this is what happened. One Sunday, I was on my way down there to preach. It was a distance of, I don't know, 45 minutes maybe. My wife was with me. Also, my good friends, Jude and Marshall Davis, who watched this broadcast pretty faithfully. Hello, Jude and Marshall in New Hampshire. They were riding in the back seat. I was going around the bypass around Nicholasville and was speeding and got pulled over for speeding on Sunday morning on my way to preach at a church. As I handed my driver's license to the officer, I said to him, "I think my license has been suspended." He said, "Well, why is that?" I said, "Well, 6 months ago, I was down in Owensboro, Kentucky, rolled through a stop sign, got a ticket, and didn't pay for the ticket. I don't know, it was $40 or $50 for 6 months. And when I went in to pay the ticket in Owensboro, the clerk said to me, 'Do you realize that your license is suspended?' I said, 'No.' I said, 'What do I need to do?' And she said, 'Well, when you get back to Lexington, go down there to the clerk's office and they'll pull up your record. You'll have to pay a fine and they will renew it.' Well, I did not know that driving on a suspended license was an arrestable offense. So I guess was never in a hurry to get this taken care of. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, riding down to Danville, Kentucky as the interim preacher down there, I was arrested. I was pulled over for speeding. The officer said to me, "Mr. Moody, I'm going to have to take you in." Well, I didn't know what he meant by that. I had never been taken in. I said, well, I'm on my way to preach down here at the next little town, Danville. Do you mind if I stop by your office on my way home from church and we can take care of whatever it is we need to take care of? That's how clueless I was. He said, no, we got to go now. I had to get out of the car. They did not put cuffs on me, but I had to get in his car. I told my friend Marshall Davis, I said, call the church down there and tell them I've been detained in a traffic incident. I wanted to be as vague as possible, of course. Well, they took me in, took my picture, booked me, put me in a cell with 3 other people that they picked up overnight. I talked to each one of them. Of course, the social worker there in the office interviewed me, and it was her responsibility, as is customary, to call the judge anytime somebody's arrested and solicit either a bail or a date or to let the person go on OR, on their own recognizance, it's called, I learned. Well, the judge was in church. I think it's the only time I regretted that a judge was in church on Sunday morning. It was 2:00 in the afternoon before he called in. He let me go. I called my wife and said, come and get me, which she did. Well, of course, this was a great embarrassment to me. I was afraid it was going to be in the newspapers. I was afraid the president of the college or trustees would find out. As a matter of fact, there was a trustee of the college, a member of the church where I was preaching. He was also superintendent of schools. Buddy Purdon. Some of you know him. Well, I didn't tell the people of that church until about 4 months later. I was too embarrassed. I was preaching through the little book of First Peter, and I came to the text in, I think it's chapter 4, that says, let none of you suffer as a murderer, as a thief, or as a busybody. If you're going to suffer, do it for Christ. And of course, there are people all over the world who have to suffer because of their faith in Christ. There's persecution all over. And of course, my young friend, David Black, suffered, shot in the head, because he was bearing witness, prophetic witness, to the Lord Jesus Christ, being on the streets, defending people. Well, I told my story. Of course, it was funny, and the people laughed. And what happened, there was a man in the church who got very upset about this, wrote me about it, that I had caused such disruptive laughter in the church. Isn't that crazy? I didn't respond. He wrote the church deacons. They didn't respond. He ended up leaving the church. And the irony is that he was a graduate of Georgetown College, and the college was trying to get a donation from him. I blew all that up. That's my story of the day. I'm going to start a series on great questions of the Gospels. What question do you want me to deal with? Do you have a question? Send it to me. If you include a $5 bill, I'll put it way down the schedule. If you include a $100 bill, I'll put it way up on the schedule. If you include $1,000, I'll come to your house. We'll have a personal conversation about whatever questions on your mind. God bless you all. Keep your sense of humor in these trying times. Be generous to those in need. Pray for me. Pray for those in authority, including our president and governors. Be joyful in all things. This is All Saints weekend. Yeah, we've turned it into a party called Halloween, but remember this, you can still be a saint to somebody today. Make it happen. I'll see you next week in the meeting house. I'm Dwight A. Moody.